All right, how's it going, guys? If you can hear me or everything, just go ahead and let me know in the chat. Today we're pretty much going to be working on mostly pendants, probably a couple marbles, because I like marbles. I'm going to be playing with dichro, which is not something I have done a whole lot of. But hey, why not? So you get to watch me screw up dichro stuff on stream, which everybody's going to love to see. So first thing I'm working on here is going to be a compression bead. I'm taking my tube, getting it nice and hot, and I'm going to blow it into a real thin bubble. Now I'm basically going to put a whole bunch of dots around the outside. I'm only going to use the top half of the piece, so my first line of dots is going to be at the halfway mark to kind of mark what exactly I'm doing and where I am in my project. And I feel, whoop. Oh, there goes that. All right, take two. I'm going to take a thin stringer and just kind of draw what are going to end up being looking like flower petals. The trick here is you want to make sure you heat the stringer, but not the glass that you're attaching it to, because the glass that you're attaching it to is incredibly thin and will dip in really easily if it's heated almost at all. So I'm just kind of doing squiggly lines. I think I'm going to do one more layer of those. Not having good luck with my stringers so far today. And now I'm just going to put a dot in the center of this double amber purple. All right, just like that. First project of the day, and especially the first project of a stream, I like to do something a little bit easier. Make it my warm-up piece. So what I'm doing now is I want to heat all of that work that I put in, and not only just to melt it in like I would on any piece, but it's also going to start to sink into the center of the bubble. And once that starts happening, I'll take it out of the flame for a second so you guys can kind of see. And what I'm trying to get this to do is actually sink into itself so that there will be clear glass on the outside of all of the color work that I did. Now I had to blow out a little bit because my glass is super thin and the stringers I put on were kind of thick. So I just want to even everything out before I begin to sink it. And then I'm holding my hand at a sort of downward angle to get everything to sink down. So you can kind of see how it all sunk down like that. I want to gather it in around itself so it's not such a giant disc. It's a little bit more of a ball. Hi, Ma. So while I'm doing this, while it's sinking down, it's also consolidating air bubbles. So when I want to pop them in the next step or two, I'll have a couple really big air bubbles that are easy to pop instead of a whole bunch of little ones that are much harder. All right, so now you can see it's much more of a ball, less of a giant disc. So now I'm going to add my background color. And basically, I just want to hide all the work that I did on the back of the piece. So I'm just going to smush it right in the middle and then kind of do a wiggle. Just like that. Give it a second. Now I'm going to gather that up, flatten the back. And all I did is press that on my little graphite pad here. And now the back is nice and flat. So now we're going to take it off the tube. Attach a handle to the bottom. Hit the spot closest to the bead that's actually still a tube. Now there's going to be a bubble on the top. I'm going to get rid of that. First, I'm going to pull a bunch of glass out so that bubble's really thin. And then if you just focus your heat on one specific spot, it'll pop. And you can kind of see there's a hole or a divot. So now I want to focus on the inside rim of that divot. And that's going to help it melt into the rest of my piece. But I want to stay as far away from the handle as I can because I use a really thin handle, which will very quickly melt if it gets too hot. This takes a little while, obviously. But you can't rush it. You got to let it do its thing. Otherwise, it won't be a bead in the end. It'll be a disc. It'll be flat on the front. Any number of things can go wrong. All right. So probably won't be able to see the actual design. But as always, I will post videos tomorrow and on all my social media of the projects that were done today. So you'll be able to see the final products up there. So now I'm going to add a handle. Basically just want to add a 6mm rod to the side. Handle. Adding a loop. Once that's on the side, add this handle back to the bottom. Now we just want to gather a bunch of glass up off this 6mm rod. I also want to make sure that it melts into our piece completely. So this is all one big solid piece of glass. And you're just going to pull it down and away. Let it cool for a second. Flip it, and then back down. And you'll have your loop. Once that starts moving, stops moving, we shall pull it. Flame cut there. That wasn't really supposed to touch, so I'm going to pull a little bit of extra glass off. Now I'm going to seal the back of the loop to the piece. And now we're just going to adjust the loop a little bit. So now our loop is nice and straight. It's a good size. Tap off your handle. Clean up your cold marks. It's going to be one on the bottom and then one on the back side of the piece. I'm hitting the front because there's just something weird there that I don't know what it was. And like I said, all projects will have it be in the video tomorrow, so you'll actually get to see the colors. The colors don't come in on your piece until it cools down after it's sat in the kiln. Right now, that red is nowhere near as it's way too dark. It's not as dark in its final form as it is right now. So check out the video tomorrow if you want to see some cool stuff that we made today. All right. Now I'm going to play around with some dichro. I don't have any kind of set way I'm doing this. Today is just going to be kind of literally just playing around, trying to figure out how I can best make a dichro pendant. So some of them are probably going to suck. And if they're really terrible, they're totally not going to go in the video. Because no one needs to see that. So we're going to start by doing a gather. And then I am going to press down on the marver to create a disc that's perpendicular to my handle. I don't want to do it too large because I don't have huge chunks of Dichro to work with. And I don't have a good way of getting the Dichro into manageable strips because for some reason I don't have a scoring knife anymore. All right. So, disc. Set that aside. Here is my Dichro. Gonna go ahead and attach to the corner. Dichro is incredibly finicky. It doesn't like anything or anyone trying to do anything to it. So you have to, you got to do a few things. You've always got to preheat it, make sure everything is warmed slowly. And then I only ever hit one side of the Dichro. The Dichro is a metal filament that's actually printed on the side of glass. And so if you hit the filament itself with the flame, you're likely going to fry it. It'll just kind of turn gray and scuzzy and gross. And nobody wants that. So instead, what I'm going to do is heat only this side of the Dichro. So no actual heat hits the Dichro. And then when I put it on my piece, I'm going to put it filament side down like that. And that should help preserve the actual metal on the piece. I want to get this really, really hot, the piece, not the Dichro. That way it adheres without any bubbles or anything. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to take my tweezers and kind of round it out so that it all sits on the piece real nice. Actually, first I'm going to take my scissors and cut some of it off. That's pretty good. Round that out. What I'm doing is I'm adhering the edges of the Dichro so that heat doesn't get under the glass in any way and cause the metal to erode. Not bad. Straighten this out a little bit. I do. I will make that. I was basically waiting for you to come on, Deb, and I will go ahead and do a red. I'm going to do a red and blue marble to match everything. Let's go ahead and finish this project, and then I will do yours. All right, so now the Dichro is adhered pretty well. I'm going to melt it in a little bit more, and then we're going to add our background color. I'm going to go with the blue again. So cobalt blue is like the most generic background color ever. It makes most things look pretty good. So I'm going to start around the edge. And I want it to be a pretty thin layer. So I'm going to lay it down quickly. And I'm really pulling on my glass because I don't want this to get crazy thick on me. See, it's just kind of a glob of glass in the back there. So now I'm going to heat that whole thing up I want to melt it all in, and then I'm going to press it down and do a disc one more time. And now that I have that blue on the back of my dichro, I basically have clear disc, dichro, clear, blue. So the dichro is sandwiched between two really thick pieces of glass, which will make sure that it doesn't fry out or shouldn't fry out. So I can hit it with the heat a little bit more than I could prior to putting that blue on the back there. All right, now it's nice and melted in. Gonna stamp it. Heat it up again, do it one more time. So dichro is incredibly shiny and pretty, and when it fries out, it goes from being shiny and pretty to being like a gray, scuzzy, burned look. Like it, if you see fried out dichro, there's only it just looks fried out. It's whatever the chemical compound that gives the color just burns, and so it doesn't work out. All right, so that's a good shape for the most part. So now we're going to take this off the thick rod, put it onto a thinner run as we get towards the point of finishing out our piece. Do a cold seal, heat only the handle, not the piece. Makes for a very weak seal. That'll pop right off when I want it to. And then we're going to melt off the 12 millimeter clear rod that was was the basis of the piece. Now I got kind of a button. So we're going to heat this up, and I want to melt that down very similar to how when I popped the hole in the last, or popped the bubble off the top in the last piece. You just want to hit it with the heat, let it sit there and soak, and it'll all even itself out into a nice dome eventually. My handle's too small. It's hot. This is as boring to do as it is to watch. All right, now it's pretty much melted in, so I'm going to adjust my hand slightly down and let gravity kind of grab the glass, so hopefully it'll start to dome out just a little bit, which it looks like it is. All right, so that's kind of the shape. So for this one, I want to add a color handle, or loop handle. So I do the same thing as I did on the last project. We're going to heat up the side of the piece, heat up the tip of the handle, touch the two together. Tap off the first handle, and then I'm going to reattach it on the bottom. Attach a bigger handle so I don't burn my hands. Well, longer handle. Now we're just going to do a little bit of gather here for our loop. Make sure it melts all the way in. Then once you got a nice thick gather, same process. Hold it flat side up, down and away. Stop, let it cool for a second, and then bring it back down. Once that stops moving, melt off this. Press the bottom of the loop, melt it in so it's all one piece of glass. And then we'll adjust our loop a little bit. And that actually looks super cool. So take off that. You want to heat both of your punty marks, one on the bottom, one on the back. Let this cool for a second, because if I do, I think you might actually be able to see it. And it's purty. Get off my tweezers. So it'll show it better in the picture. All those little squares are all real shiny and pretty. So it's actually, none of the Dichro fried out, and the piece ended up looking pretty good. So for my next project, good friend of mine, Deb Dini, has gotten some marbles of mine in the past, and she asked me if I could make one of my air trap marbles on stream. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So the first thing with the air trap marbles is I use this tool. This is a VIN pin, and it's basically a whole bunch of tungsten pins set into a graphite pad. And so during one of the steps, and I'll tell you when that is, I actually stamp it on this graphite pad, and it creates a whole bunch of little dots on the bottom. And so you'll see the rest of the process. But yes, VIN pin. It's cool. I feel like working with a gigantic rod like that. All right. And then we're going to do red and blue. So the two colors I'm going to use for this one are going to be Red Elvis Strike and Cobalt Blue. The only downside to the Red Elvis Strike is it turns clear when you're working it, and then later on in the kiln or when you flame anneal it or whatever, it goes back to being red, and it's a bright red. It's actually one of my favorite reds, period. It just looks really good. So we're going to start with a 12 millimeter clear rod, and I just want to get a nice big gather. First, I'm going to clean up the end. When you have fresh, cut ends on your pieces, it creates a whole bunch of bubbles. And glass, many times, is the journey of trying to reduce bubbles in your piece. And I mean, half of those things don't even show up like in your final product. 9 out of 10 non-glass blowers will look at it and just not even see them. But 10 out of 10 glass blowers will look at it and see all the bubbles. That's all they'll see. So, professional pride. Try to avoid bubbles. Except for these bubbles. I guess in this project, I'm actually purposefully putting bubbles. But bubbles should only be where you want them to be, not where they like just show up. So these are strategic bubbles. Okay, I'm going to stop saying bubbles now. All right, so I'm going to gather this pretty big. I want a reasonable size marble. And your initial gather in this project is basically all the glass you get. You're only ever going to be reducing the size of this piece as you work it. It's not going to be increasing, because even as you put color into the piece, later on you're going to kind of pull that color out. So you want your initial gather to be nice and big. All right, that's pretty good. See, pretty reasonable size gather. We're going to smush it flat. And we got a disc. What I used is actually this graphite smusher. Pretty sure that's the technical term. Now I'm going to heat the bottom up, and this is where I'm going to set it on the VIN pin. And I'm trying to get the center of my piece on the center hole or center pin in my little tool. All right, so I don't know if you can, oh yeah, you can. So you can see each of those are tiny little holes and divots in the bottom of my piece. Now I'm going to take my color rod and basically fill them all in. They go around in concentric circles, so you start with the center dot and then just go around and around and around and around, and you keep doing that. All right, now that I've filled the center dot and 2 rings with red, I'm going to switch to blue. All right. So now you can see that center is red and the outside 2 rings are blue. So now we're doing a process which is called imploding. Well, first I'm going to melt all the dots in. But basically what I'm going to be trying to do is hitting, you got your disc. I want to hit the upper inside corner of that disc, and it's going to start to dome over in every direction and creates a cup. And on this one, so when you create a cup, a lot of times for flowers and stuff, you smush it to get the flower to kind of come out like that. I don't actually want that to happen with this guy. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the center than I normally would, so that rather than a cup, it just sinks down. And what that's going to do is take each of those dots of color and stretch it into a little point on what's, a sea anemone or whatever. Part of this process is knowing the difference in density of your different glasses. Different Different colors of glass will be more or less dense. Denser colors will not just kind of drag down super easy, and not very dense colors, the colors that are closest to clear, which is the least dense glass that you work with, will stretch out easier. So the red Elvis Strike is an incredibly not very dense at all, and the blue, I mean, it's not dense, but it's denser. So the blue is going to be more reluctant to drop down than the red is. And it's more annoying when you have your dense color on the inside and your least dense color on the outside. But since I have my blue on the outside, it actually makes it so that the cup that I'm forming, which you can kind of see there, well, no, actually you can't. Kind of. The cup that I'm forming is a little less annoying than it would be if I had done the colors the other way around. So now I just want to gather it again. As I do that, the glass that's in the very center that's now a dome will slowly start to push its way down as the hot glass will push the air out. And that's kind of what I'm shooting for. This process, a lot of times, it just takes a while, and you got to learn to be patient. Just keep hitting the same spot with the flame and let the glass does what it does. If you try to rush it, you will end up messing up some of the work that you've done, or at least making it look a little less ideal. All right, so now the little bubble is pretty much gone. We still have a cup, we still have a divot in there. So what I'm going to do is reach in there with that flame, using the pin flame to only hit the interior, and then I'm going to actually reach in there and pull the glass out with this 4mm rod. I'm just going to do that a couple times. So now we no longer have a divot or a cup. So I want to gather my whole thing up, and there's going to be a whole bunch of glass that's actually color that's on the outside of the clear. I don't want that. I only want the color that's on the inside of the clear. So I'm actually going to heat it up and slowly pluck off all of the color that's on the outside of my clear marble. So first I'm drawing it down to a point. And we're just going to pluck it off. All right. Yeah, when your glass is hot, it sticks to other glass. So basically what I'm doing is I'm touching it with the tip of my rod and then rotating the rod, and it pulls the glass around the handle that you're using. So if I rotate both at the same time, it pulls glass in from each individual little spot so that it pulls things down to the center as I'm getting rid of the color. That's a technique that takes a little while to get good at. So now we're going to take it over to the marble mold. Marble mold is just a bunch of different size spheres that have been carved into a piece of graphite. I'm going to pick one that I know is too big, but will help shape things a little bit. Get it down to something resembling a ball. And then we'll scoop down to the next size down. With marbles, you always want to use one size smaller than it seems like you should. You're not actually using the cup, you're using the rim of the mold to do your actual shaping. So we go down to this size and change how you're holding it, change your axis so that it gets down to a nice marble. All right, so now we got a decent shape. I want to go ahead and switch over to a much smaller handle, so I'm not wielding this giant 12mm thing. So I'm going to heat the handle, not the piece. Touch the two together. Now at this piece, I want it to be a little bit bigger, so I'm actually going to heat and separate above the rod a little bit so that I can then gather the remaining clear glass into my marble. That'll give it just a little boost in size. And more than anything, that's to help it fit one of the cup sizes on my thing. One of them's a little bit too small, and the next one up's just a little bit too big. So I'm going to increase the size of my piece slightly. So right now I'm just gathering glass again. See, now it's kind of a oblong, not so marble shape. So we're going to switch back to the larger mold first. Get it into its rough shape. And now it's big enough that the second largest mold will be the right size for it. All right. Every time you put it in the mold, you have to then immediately put it back in the flame. The mold creates little creases. They kind of look like fingerprints across your piece. Those are cold marks. You want to always get rid of those. Otherwise, it'll ruin the optical effect of your piece. So now every piece has to have its axis changed one time, at least. Well, they don't have to, but a lot of times, if you don't change the axis, it'll look like a perfect marble. And then when you go to roll it after it comes out of the kiln, it's not perfect. It's like not even close. So I always change the axis once at least, and that helps that process work out, because when you then heat it up and put it in the mold one more time, you can feel it if it's not quite right. So now I'm going to basically try to work half the marble at a time, because you have a super thin handle that's going to melt really easily. It's probably still going to melt easily. That's okay. Heat it up. You can feel it when there's bumps or when anything is not perfect with the marble. It creates little, bumps. You feel it. All right. So now This handle has gotten hot a little bit during the process, and that causes the handle to adhere to the marble a little bit more than I want it to. So when I tap it off, it's going to create a little bit larger of a scar. So now I want to reduce the amount of scarring that I'm going to have in the final one. So I add a second handle to the bottom. And this one, it needs to be really weak. So you heat it up, let it cool, make sure your piece is cold. Then when you touch the two together and tap off the other one, this handle sucks. It is now super weak. So I always kind of try to hold it in an upward, downward angle. That will help reduce the stress on the joint just a little bit. And now I'm heating only the spot where my last handle was, almost nothing else. I just want to hit that spot. Once it's nice and molten, run it through the mold. Now we're all set. Make sure you heat that up, get rid of any cold marks. Now I want to let this cool for just a second. There's nothing worse than having at this stage in the process, it being too hot, and you set it in the mold and it gets a crease on it that's really super hard to fix. So you can see a little bit of the pattern. But these colors aren't fully formed. So in the pics tomorrow will look much better. So, and just tap. Good luck, you can see it. Tap, tap. Pops right off. There's going to be a tiny little scar. Find that spot. You want to hit the scar and the spot around it so that any imperfections get either filled in or they stretch out. So now you have a perfect marble. And then toss that in the kiln. So there you go, Deb. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have anyone, or if anyone on there has any like, hey, I'd like to see this, just let me know. I'm happy to make stuff. I mute my computer so my friends who don't know I'm streaming don't message me. All right. So what I'm doing is I'm getting dichro down to a better size. I like this kind of pattern. Oh yeah, you can see it there nicely. That's kind of cool how it's got that striations of sparkle. So I'm gonna try to make another pendant that preserves exactly that, so it will look like it's just streaking, probably diagonal across your chest. But I can't find my stupid scoring knife, so I get to use my nippers. And if there's any soft glass workers watching me, I'm sorry. Like, I know it's like a crime to mess with dichro that way, but that's what I got. A little warm in the studio today. Last week I was using a fire in the fireplace. This week it's like 80 degrees in here. Plus I also have I got a kiln here and a bigger kiln there. I was pulling tube earlier today, so both kilns were on. So this whole spot's just super warm. I'm sure my computer loves it. So just like last time, I'm going to do a gather and then smush it flat into a disc. And once I've done that, we will add the dichro to it. Dichro is a pretty recent addition to my repertoire. up until now, basically. I mean, I probably haven't messed with Dichro in like 6 years. But 6 years ago when I messed with it, it sucked. And I had a horrible time, and I wasted money and time and was frustrated and just kind of swore it off. But as it turns out, if you blow glass full time, in 6 years you get better. And so now I'm revisiting it as a concept. Got our disc. Take our Dichro, attach to the tip, or that tip, whichever one. And now it's off camera. I didn't have that in the kiln for very long, so I'm being a little more cautious than usual in my preheating process to make sure that my Dichro doesn't explode or pop off my handle. Mainly so it doesn't explode. All right. So now our Dichro is nice and preheated. I want to get my disc hot again. This time I decided to make my Dichro chunk quite a bit larger than my disc. That way I was guaranteed to cover every section of the disc, and then I'll just cut the excess bits off with the scissors because that doesn't seem to be too terribly difficult. All right, so we're just going to set this down, Dichro side up, and attach. Yeah, that's cool. All right, so first I'm going to, actually I think first I'm going to heat the whole thing up and smush it just a little bit more to make sure it adheres better. All right, now we're going to snip. And you can see if you get it hot enough, you can really cut pretty cleanly and pretty nicely on your piece. The trick is just always, as with almost everything in glass, you got to get it hot enough. When people start with glass, the main reason they struggle is they're afraid to get things too hot. And I'm not going to say there's no such thing, but if you haven't been, if you're just starting out as far as you're concerned, there's no such thing. Just get it hotter. That's why you're having problems. All right, that's pretty good. So now we're going to take our tweezers and run along the seam and make sure our seams get put down. This is actually one of the spots you have to be the most careful because on the underside of the lip where the seam is, you have Dichro that is exposed to the air. And so as you're heating it, it means it's exposed to your flame, which means it could melt. And that's the thing we're trying to fry out, and that's the thing we're trying to avoid. So now all around the seam has been pressed in and clear glass has been draped over the Dichro. So we're going to heat the whole thing up a little bit, not too crazy hot. And we're going to do one more stamp. Stamp. And now we're going to add the back color. So in this one, I'm going to use, I mean, it's not black. It's super blue. Basically, there is no black in glass. There's either insanely dark blue or insanely dark green. So it's, and I mean really dark. So it's pretty much black. But if you put it on real thin, you'll see it come out as blue or green. So I'm putting this on thin. I don't mind that it comes out a little bit blue. That's actually fine for the project. But that's also why I picked this black. I have other blacks that are super greens, and I don't want that. The green is more opaque and won't look as good. So you're basically running around the entire piece, hitting the whole thing, and covering all the seams of your dichro. And then you're going to move in and do the same thing all the way around the back of the piece. And if you do it well, and everything was hot enough, no bubbles. And no bubbles is the name of the game. So we have one spot that the color didn't quite hit. So I want to press in and over with the color next to it while it's nice and hot. And what that's going to do is it adheres the glass and pushes the air up and out rather than going over the air and trapping a bubble. So now we got all the design work done. I want to go ahead and heat this whole thing up. And then we're going to stamp it and get this back into a nice disc shape. If you guys have any questions, comments, whatever, throw them in the chat. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit that like button. Everything I make today, totally going to be for sale. So if you like any of it, check it out. And as I've said 1,000 times, and we'll say 1,000 times more, I'm going to have a picture video of all the products that have been made in today's stream up tomorrow, as well as posting them on my Facebook page. All right, we're going to do the first stamp. That first one kind of defines the back and gets your disc a little bit more centered. Now I'm heating this up, and the second one is going to make sure that the rim, there's a little ridge right where the color meets the clear, and this is actually going to get rid of that ridge. And once that ridge is gone, then I'll stamp it, and that'll be kind of its final back shape. I think this one's going to look really cool, just for the record. All right, so now we're going to take it off of our 12 millimeter handle. You can see that's kind of the shape, nice and flat on the back. And it is a very, 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 very deep blue. Cold seal and melt off the 12 millimeter rod. And now we heat the front forever. Piece looks cool. None of the dichro is fried out. So that's good. This is the first point in the piece when I can really actually see all of the dichro. So true to fashion, if it's going to look terrible and if it's going to turn out that it was not a good piece, you're not going to find out until like 1 or 2 steps from the end. Glass sucks like that. It doesn't, like, if it's going to crack, it's going to crack at the very end, like the last step. Never just, you know, explodes right off the bat. Glass, make sure you want to suffer the most you possibly can if it's not going to work. Almost got that dome that I'm looking for. Bring it down a little bit. And shebang. It's pretty good. Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So on this piece, my dichro is not uniformly colored. You saw in the beginning it kind of has those striations. So when I'm adding my handle, which is my next step, I have to decide which way I want those striations to angle, and then attach my loop accordingly, knowing the loop's going to be at the top. I've decided on diagonal because I think it will look coolest. Whenever you're using a colored loop, well, okay, this is probably not universally true, but whenever I'm using colored loop for the most part, I like to use the same color as the background. Okay, I wish this rod wasn't this long. Attach the loop, tap that off. I'm going to go to a better sized handle. Touch it to the bottom. And now to make our loop, we want to do a gather, just like we did before. Make sure it's nice and melted in. All around the base. This is a slightly larger pendant than my last one, so I want to make sure that my loop is appropriately sized. Everything needs to look nice and cohesive on your final piece. Once we got a size I'm happy with, flat side up, down and away. Flip, and down. Oh, so you can totally see that. Those are the striations. Got them going, you know, nice off direction. And trust me, it looks a lot better in person. Or in a photo, which you'll see tomorrow. Now, we talked about color density a little bit in our air trap project that we did just a minute ago. So this color, which is, I want to say it's Raven. It might be Turbo Cobalt. I'm not awesome at keeping my blacks labeled. Either way, it's an incredibly dense color. So that the loop pulling process and making sure that the front part of my loop isn't like ridiculously fat is difficult to do. So what I do is you heat the front of the loop and then go like this. And what it does is it actually drags some of that color up and around. So then when I condense the back of my back of my loop will get thicker and the front of my loop will be thinner. Loop work is an art unto itself. Tap the handle off. Make sure you get away the scar on the bottom and on the back. And toss that in the kiln. Oh, hi, Janet. Yeah, that's glass. I mean, I guess every art form has its own little things that kind of suck. Um, Things exploding after you finished all of it is glass's thing that kind of sucks. It's worse than most. I mean, what I wouldn't give for like the glass equivalent of an eraser. In glass, fixing things is not always an option. Well, luckily for you, Zach, I'm going to do something else. So now we're going to do yet another one, but I'm going to do a totally different shape and color pattern. I'm going to be doing kind of a, I don't know what it's called, but you'll see it when I do it. All right, so this time, instead of doing a straight down disc, I'm actually going to flatten along the axis of my piece. So I'm going to get this hot and then, so it'll be flat there. Oh, shit, that's hot. So same starting process. I want to get a nice, decent-sized gather going. I don't care this time if it's a perfect ball, because you need it to be a perfect ball when you do your downward press to get the perpendicular disc. That's important. This is a much more free-form kind of disc. I just want it to be like a paddle. It's kind of like a lollipop. Like an oblong, crazy-looking lollipop. So the last two pieces of Dichro that I used had patterns. The first one was those squares, and the second one had those striations in color. This time I'm going to be using a Dichro that's just a flat film. And then I'm going to use the color behind it to kind of give it some uniqueness. So I'm going to flatten this. Lollipop. Set that aside, grab a Dichro. I need a larger piece of Dichro. So now it's going to be super shaky because I'm not preheating it in the kiln. So hopefully it won't go boom. It might. We'll see. With the non-patterned stuff, it's often incredibly difficult to tell which side of the dichro the film is on until you hit the film, and then it disappears and becomes gross and nasty. Okay, there we are. So I want to preheat this whole thing, and you can actually feel it trying to explode on you. Like, it's really difficult to explain, but it's like an air pressure, and you kind of feel a tingle go up the handle that you're using. But it didn't go boom, so that's good. So now we're going to heat this, the bottom of my little paddle. And I'm just kind of using the heat that's bouncing off my lollipop to heat the dichro. And once it's crazy hot and I don't have stuff cluttering my bench, I'm going to press it down, dichro side up so that it hits the clear. All right, got that to stick pretty nicely. Now we'll cut off that piece of dichro that's on the side. I'm going to do it carefully because I actually can still use that. That is a totally usable piece of dichro. Cut off this corner. Whew. And then press our edges all around. This will not look like a lollipop when it's done. At least I hope it doesn't. So I didn't quite get all the way up as high as I wanted. So I'm actually going to drag a little bit of dichro up. It thins out the dichro, but this particular piece is super dense in color, so it doesn't really matter. All right. So now I'm going to add, well, should probably melt this all in a little bit. All right, so you can, it's kind of hard to see that it sparkles, but that it's kind of an almost yellowish color. If I just left this, that's all you'd see. It wouldn't be super exciting. So instead, I'm going to start with my super dark black, but I'm not going to cover the entire piece with it this time. I want to make a real thin line right down the center. Like that. Then I'm going to take my red Elvis strike, and I want to lay down a line of that right next to my black on either side. And then go back to black, and I'm going to finish out the rest of the back of the piece. All right, so now you can kind of see we got the two lines of red Elvis and the rest is black. So unless this dichro is like the most dense stuff on the face of the planet, it should be a mostly black pendant with two nice little lines of red that go behind the dichro of the piece. So now I want to melt all that color in. I'm going to smush it again. Now it's nice and melted in. Now we're going to create the shape of the final piece. Now this is why I didn't just do a disc, because so far I could have just done my previous disc and this whole thing would have been a lot easier. But now I want to attach a handle to the bottom, and I want to kind of pull this down into like a tongue shape. I got to come up with a better word to describe this shape, but it's like a tongue. Yes, this handle is too short. Yes, my hand is burning slightly. All right, so I want to focus my heat kind of in the middle, and I'm rotating and pulling ever so slightly. And you can see it's kind of slowly drawing the piece down to more of an arrowhead kind of shape. It's very easy during this process to twist your piece, so you have to be very careful not to do that. And we're going to pull this off. And then add the handle back on, but this is going to be a cold seal rather than the last one that was a hot seal. So looking at it now, I might want to make it a hot seal. And that entire last step might have been unnecessary. Not relevant. All right, so now we're going to make the loop. And we're going to make the loop out of the top chunk of our piece. And this is going to make sure that the loop maintains the same color pattern and structure and everything of the piece, but it's also going to kind of define the top of our piece a little bit better. So you want to get the top of the piece super hot. Try to avoid pulling it too much. You want it to come down a little bit, but not a ton. And just like the last every pendant I've done so far, flat side up, down and away. I don't want to pull it very far on this one because I don't have a lot to work with. And then boom. Ah, touched. Don't touch. Well, this one's going to be nifty. All the same process for the loop as every other piece. Touch it to the back, heat up the whole thing, straighten everything out, make it look pretty. That's the final shape. This one's really not going to have the color that, like, its final color is not going to come out until it sits in the kiln for a while because those two red Elvis strike strips are just going to take a minute. They're just going to take a minute of soaking before they become red. So it looks, what you saw kind of looked clear. The final project should, in theory, I hope, have two nice red lines right down there that show through that dichro, that kind of yellowish dichro that's on top. So we shall see tomorrow in the video that I'm going to mention after every single piece. Okay. I'm hot. That's stressful. I'm going to do another compression bead because they're easier. Yeah, that end of statement. I don't know why I rose my voice at the end of that one. I'm going to do this one just a little bit bigger. One of the last projects I'm going to... What time is it? Oh, hey. Okay, so the next project that I'm going to do is called a radicello. And literally, if you want to see what it looks like, look it up on Google or whatever. It's an incredibly, ridiculously complex pattern of glass, and I haven't done them in probably 2 years. So guess what? We got to explore that live on stream. So hopefully I won't screw it up. All right, big thing, blow bubble. Yeah, it's nice. I don't have any fun stringers. And since I didn't think about this ahead of time, we're just going to do dots. Dots can look awesome too. So like the first one, pick your halfway point, draw a line of dots all the way around the piece at that halfway point. Totally not the halfway point, but it's pretty close. And just kind of take different colors, go all the way down. The people who are crazy good at this technique can do like Indian sand mandalas and stuff just in dots on the outside of their glass. It is truly spectacular. It's one of these things where like this technique, pretty much everyone can do it. That's been blowing glass for any length of time. It's a fairly standard one. But like so many other things in glass and in art, you can take a single simple technique to its extreme and be making stuff that blows people's minds. I could try to make a glass skull. I'm not going to do it right now or today even, but meaning I have to go look up someone who's better than me, do a video on how to make a glass skull before I try to make a glass skull. But if you're going to buy it, I'll make it. All right. So that cup went all the way in. It's kind of hard to see, but I actually drew it all the way in, and the top part sunk in and touched the bottom part, sealing the piece into a vacuum. Now I'm going to gather it down. And I'll probably stamp it on the marver, depending on how it gathers down. Yeah, that's good. Smush in a black background color, which for these I almost universally use blue. And with these, that blue doesn't need to cover the entire back because most of the back is just clear. You're not seeing anything. With a lot of these background colors, the main thing you're trying to do is hide the work that you've done. So all the dots come to a point and it looks kind of ugly. So you want to make sure you put something over that. So when people look at the back of the piece, it's, oh my God, how do you do that? I don't get it. Instead of like, oh, wow, that's ugly. So you want your piece to look nice, front and back. All right, I will figure out how to make a glass skull. Okay, super long hand it is. Cold seal, heat the tip of the rod, not the piece, touch to the center. And then we're going to melt off this top thing. And then probably recenter everything a little bit. So my tube was not perfectly on-centered with my piece. So now I'm just going to heat up a little bit. And that makes sure that that is nice and perpendicular. Now we've got that big bubble on the top. We want to heat up that whole section, pull a bunch of glass off and pop the bubble. And pop the bubble. And this bubble is way smaller than the last one, so it won't take forever to heat and go away. So as always, if you guys have any questions, comments, apparent requests, let me know. Whatever the request is, I'm probably not going to know how to do it right now. I'll figure it out, though. All right, that's pretty good. Now I really wish I hadn't used this handle, because this is the one I wanted to make my loop out of. Awesome. All right, so then in that case, I'm going to add a cold seal to the bottom. Tap that off. And now hot seal this to the top. And that's what we're going to use to make our loop. Make sure you get a nice big gather going. Get it nice and hot, flat side up, down and away. Are you noticing a theme with the loops? Flip and down. Whoop. This loop decided to be terrible. I had no input whatsoever in that process, but we can fix it with the tweezers. As my old glassblowing master was wont to say, you're not a maestro because of what you can make, you're a maestro because of what you can fix. So I guess technically I'm a loop maestro. That's about it, though. All right. Tap, tap. Get rid of the piece on the scar on the bottom, scar on the back. There you have it. All right, so the next project's going to be insanely difficult. I'm probably going to screw it up, and it is going to be ridiculous. So give me just 1 second. Who's speaking? Oh. Okay, so it's been so long that since I've done these that my glass is like covered in dust and dirt. So I got to go wash this off real quick, and then I'll be right back. All right, so I'm going to be using standard wall tubing, which I hate pulling points on. Normally, this would be a project that I would pull a point on, but I'm not doing it on standard wall. The handle ends up being crazy thin, and I've broken more than one. And when things shatter in your hand, it sucks. So I don't want to do that. All right, so the Raticello uses stringers of color that you're going to be drawing on in a specific pattern on the outside of glass, and then basically flipping the glass inside out. So I'm going to be a little bit lazy and only use 2 different colors of glass. I'm going to be using caramel and blue caramel for my Raticello color. So to pull the stringers, create a glob. Make sure it's pressed together real nicely so you don't get air bubbles. Then I'm going to heat the whole thing up and pull it out. This is probably going to be my second to last project. I think after this I'm going to do a Dichro Vortex marble and call it a night. But between those two, these are not small projects, so I'll probably make it to 7. For the first time since I started, yay! All right. Get that ball of color nice and hot and just pull it down. This is my technique for doing stringers when I want like a lot of stringer, like really long stringer. Separate it in the center. Super long stringer, and we get 2 of them out of 1 pull. Nice and cost efficient. And whew, stringers are still hot when you're done working with them. So now we're gonna do the same thing with blue caramel. Now I'm basically trying to hit 2 specific points, get those 2 specific points nice and hot, and then you can pretzel the color. I have no idea if this is like a good way to do this or a terrible way to do this. It's just what I've been doing for like 12 years. And from what I can gather in glass, there's a decent amount of that stuff where it's like, well, yeah, you're not doing it like the 100% correct way, but the fact that you've been doing it your way for over a decade means that it's probably better you just keep doing it your way. Because if you try to do it the 100% correct way, it's gonna take you 3 years to get it right. And your way works fine. Get that color nice and screaming hot. I always go down to a smaller flame in the middle of this. That way my clear and my rod on my other hand are not so hot that they string out themselves instead of the color. And then we pull. This whole process is based on the concept that hot glass moves quicker than cold glass, and thin glass cools quicker than thick glass. So all of your thick spots will stay hot just long enough to get pulled into thin spots. And in the end, if you do it properly, the whole stringer will be one uniform thickness, or relatively close to one uniform thickness. All right, so that's the stringers we need for the project. I'm going to take my tube. I'm actually going to pop this in half. Not today. The glass chainmail, I may do that at some point, but it's actually insanely boring because the rings I can't really do on stream. That's just taking tube, cutting it on the saw, and then grinding and polishing it. And then the actual putting together of the chainmail, I mean, I'll do some if people want to see it. I think it's cool, but objectively, it's like super tedious and boring. So I'm taking my tube and I'm shrinking it down, the opening, so that I can put that handle that I made a little earlier on. I want to try to get it nice and centered. And then both the tips of each of these need to be crazy hot so they seal. And they're 2 different thicknesses, so it can be difficult to get this to do what I want it to do correctly. And we're going to call that good enough. It's not perfectly centered, but it's good enough. So now we're going to section off the piece that I want to work with. All right, so now we're going to create the top and bottom of our pattern. I'm going to use regular caramel, maybe, yeah. So all I want to do is make a perfect circle across the top here. And then again on the bottom. All right, so that's the top and bottom ring on our piece. Now I'm going to draw diagonal lines connecting the two rings. Oh. So you can see I'm kind of doing that. I have to do that all the way around. The more even, the better. Like, you want your lines to be equidistant from each other at all points in time, which is super difficult. All right. I keep hitting it with the big flame to make sure that the whole piece stays nice and warm. But you can see how we got the diagonal lines. So now I want to take the top point of one of those lines and go the opposite direction over like 4 lines, 3-4 lines, with my blue caramel instead of caramel. So you can see it kind of goes like that. The second layer of lines is actually a little bit easier because you can see the point on the bottom that you're aiming to get to once you start the top line. So you can kind of just draw your diagonal in the direction of the line that you're going to hit, or the dot that you're going to hit. Last line. All right. So now you can see you got that cool lattice pattern. So we're going to heat this whole thing up and get it to melt in. And then we're going to pluck out this end so that it all comes down to a nice clean point. But I want to melt it in before I do that. And because I did this on such thin tubing, that will make the rest of the process just a little bit easier. And it'll also make the pattern tighter in the final project. I originally tried doing this on thicker tubing and the whole thing looked ridiculous and I couldn't figure out why. Until the miracle of YouTube told me to use something other than the only thing I've ever used. All right, so now that's nice and melted in. We're going to heat the tip of that bubble where that clear is, and then I'm just going to pluck out with my rod until I get down to a point. And you want to make sure you get rid of that entire first ring, otherwise it will very much just look like a ring. So at this stage, it's actually better to overpluck your piece and get too much glass out than it is to get too little. And then we want to pull it way out like this and try to make sure that that little dot that we have is right in the center. So first we're going to heat up and blow out the colored part, and then we're going to move up the tube to the clear part and do the same. I'm going to move up the tube just a little. And then move up the tube one more time. Whoa. And don't let it do what it just did. What happened is the glass got too thin and it wrinkled and bent. Luckily, it happened far enough away from the piece that I think we're still okay. Gather glass in. I'm going to hold it up and blow. And now I'm going to sink it in. So just like we were doing in our compression beads, you want to sink the top half into the bottom half. So the temperature begins to melt. The temperature begins to melt. Clearly, I've been working for a minute. The glass begins to melt right around 1,000 degrees. So when you put glass in there, it'll be a really bright orange sodium flare. That doesn't appear until 1,000 degrees. And that's kind of the temperature that glass is okay at now. Like, it's not going to do anything funky. It's not going to crack on you. It's not going to explode. It's now in work mode. And that happens at about 1,000 degrees. For borosilicate glass, which is the kind of glass that I work, for other kind of glasses, it is different temperatures. Okay, so now you can see kind of on the inside. I don't know if you can see the pattern through the tube, but that's kind of what's going on. So now I'm going to cover the back with a color. I'm going to use blue because I'm lazy. Everything looks good with cobalt blue. I can't actually remember if this is when I'm supposed to do this or not. But it seems like as good a time as any. Now it's got a back. So I'm going to melt that in a little bit, and then I'm going to press it down on the marver again and blow again. And I don't know that I'm going to make this a pendant. This came out a little large, so I think I may just leave this as a disc to put on a pipe or something later because it is really nice. Press and blow. So now we're going to take it and open up this tube. So I'm going to take my handle, clean it up, attach it to the center. Now we're going to heat this whole section above. I'm going to let that solidify for a second. While I'm doing that, there we go. We're going to heat this whole section above my piece, and I'm going to pull and blow at the same time once it's nice and hot, and that's going to create real thin glass that I can very easily pop open. Once it's nice and hot. Woohoo, I did that terribly. That's okay. Pop it open. And then flame cut it. Ah, son of a... All right, so part of that came down and actually touched, which it's not supposed to do. I will mess with that and see what I can do. But right now I want to flare this out. You can see a cool little lattice pattern with my crappy piece of clear that's on there. It's not supposed to be. So now we're going to take the scissors and cut it down. I want to get all that clear off of there. So I'm down to just my color. There's many different ways of doing this. I actually just really like my scissors. But I will still have to go back and actually clean up the edges a little bit. Now we're down to just that. So I'm going to take a clear rod, little 4mm, and run along the edges of my piece. Once my foot pedal comes back, and tear off the edge. Now we're going to see what I can do about that irritating piece of glass that touched my piece. I'm going to see if I can just melt it in. That'd be nice. I don't know how realistic that is. Oh, it was totally realistic. What I'm doing by rotating it on the angled graphite is kind of rounding the edges of the piece out so it doesn't have like any jagged points or anything. And then you can melt those edges in, and so it won't actually increase the diameter of your piece at all. All right, I actually like this as a disc more than I would as a pendant. So if it was a pendant at this stage, I would attach my handle over here, make my loop, and then it'd be pendant. As a disc, I'm going to leave it the way it is and mess with it later. But I think I'm going to stick you on something. So I'll have pictures of this up tomorrow as well. That's not bad for the first one I've done in like 2 years. All right, I'm going to get a drink, and then final project of the night, I am going to do a Vortex Dichro Vortex marble. I'm actually going to shoot for like a 1.5 to 2 incher, because why not? Now it's the Watch Barry Look for His Tools show. Just in case the piece I have in there is not big enough, I'm sticking another piece of Dichro in there. All right, here we go. So I got myself a pretty large piece of clear because basically when I'm making these marbles, what I'm doing is I'm making them in 2 stages. I make the bottom and then I make the lens. And so the bottom of the piece is just kind of built up around the base of this rod. And then I just smush this glass into it over the course of a forever. And it pushes the lens into the piece. And part of the Vortex technique is doing everything in a cone so that it looks like it comes down to a really nice point. But the other half is that the lens magnifies everything you're looking into. So you want the piece, when you look in the front, you want it to look like it goes way deeper than the actual marble itself does. And in order to get that effect, you need both the cone of the back and the lens of the front to really give that optical illusion that makes these pieces so awesome. And sellable. Yes, I am getting hot. I'm going to be sweating by the end of this one, that's for sure. And at some point, I promise I will do a 3-inch marble on stream. That's going to be an adult stream because I will say things and swear and yell and be very upset and unhappy. But you guys will probably get a kick out of it. First thing I do is make a cone. Now that I look at that cone, it's totally not big enough. So the second thing I do is ruin my cone, gather more glass, and make a bigger cone. If you guys are enjoying the show, make sure you hit that like button. It does wonders for me. I appreciate everybody that's coming out to hang out during my stream. I hope if you're a glass person, you learned something useful. If you're not a glass person, I hope it was just entertaining. Okay, cone, bigger cone. And we're gonna go ahead and set that aside. Well, let it cool for a second, then set it aside. And then we're gonna grab our piece of Dichro. Woo! It tried to escape. That's the noise apparently that I make when things try to escape. Just want to attach to the corner. Find which side has the actual film. Heat the opposite side. I want to get it nice and hot this time because it's going to be, I have to roll it over it. I'm not just stamping it flat like I was on all my pendants. So it's important that it is movable, not moving. All right, so now that I got the Dichro on there, I'm going to use my tweezers to roll it onto my cone. And then I want to follow along the seam and make sure that all of my Dichro is under clear. All right. Then we can see we got it on there. After every single step of this project, it would behoove you to recone your piece. So I'm going to recone it. And then we're going to cover it in color. We're going to use, you guessed it, blue. I'm super boring today. Everything's blue. Now I want to cover just the Dichro and leave kind of a clear square. And I want this to be really thin. This coating of clear, really thin. All right. I got a bunch of stuff sticking off the bottom that I don't like. Normally, I wouldn't mess with it, but I am this time. So I just cut that off. And then we recone. All right. So now I'm going to do my twist. The thing you need to understand about this cone that I'm working right now is all of that is going to be seen from the inside of the piece. So everything that I'm covering and doing all that, you're not going to actually see the outside of any of that. So what I'm doing here, add thing to a bottom, add thing to a bottom. Yep, almost done with this stream for the day. I want to focus my heat on the thicker spot rotate my left hand ever so slightly slower, and it's going to create a little bit of a twist. And that's part of what will make this look like a vortex in the final project. Well, when you view it from the angle that it's intended to be viewed from. Just like that. The next step is to recone it. I'd like to thank you guys for contributing to an all-time high number of viewers at the same time for this stream. This is awesome. I'm not super famous yet. Now, I don't want this cone. See, I have the cone. It's down real nice, but it's kind of long. I don't actually want it to be very long. You want it to be kind of a short, stubby cone. So I'm going to change that a little bit. There we go. Short, stubby cone. Now, I am going to cover up all the work I've done so far. So I'm going to create the back color. I'm going to use black because I'm going to do a design on the back afterwards that will look really nice against black. Also lazy, black's easy. So you start thin, right around the rim of your cone. And the next layer is still pretty thin. And the next layer, you want it to be thicker. Because what I'm trying to do here is preserve the cone inside the glass. So by laying the glass on thicker at the thin spot of the cone and thinner at the thick spot of the cone, I'm going to end up with a glass cylinder, but the cone is going to be a cone still completely on the inside of this. I hope that made more sense to you than it did to me when I said it. Like, I know what I'm talking about, but it didn't sound like you will be able to know what I'm talking about. And you want to gather it up just a little bit at the end so you have some extra black glass below your cone. So still a cone, but much less so. Now we're going to gather it up. So first I want to gather this up and marble out the bottom, and then I'm going to create the design that's going to be on the back of the marble. Marbles are, at least vortex marbles for me, are two different projects. You have the back of the piece, which is going to have a really cool outside worked concept, a little bit easier to do, but you know, it's going to look good. And then the harder part is that inside part that I've been spending all of my time thus far working on, and that you will see through the lens on the front. So it's two marbles in one, as far as like the design process goes. Start big, work your way down, same as every other marble. So this is the 1-inch mold, and that's going to be the correct size for the back half of this marble, which means that the back half of this marble is 1 inch, at least 1 inch wide. So that means any vortex, at least my equation is that you should always have at least 50% of your vortex be lens. So you need 50% of this marble to be clear. So in theory, this will probably turn out to be around a 2-inch marble, which is large, very large. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be fun. It'll be fun. All right. So now we got that nice and marbled down, which is something I totally don't know if that's an actual technique term, but marbling down. That's what it's done. Nailed it. Okay. So now we're going to grab some color glass. And I'm going to figure out what color I want. Okay, we're using this. And I'm basically going to be creating a spiral of dots that starts at the rim here and goes around to the center of the bottom. So you can kind of see how that spirals down. Melt them in. It's better to actually melt this all the way down rather than try to use the mold to get your little dots to sink in. That will shift the dots ever so slightly. Again, probably something that wouldn't matter to 9 out of 10 people that are viewing your piece. But 10 out of 10 glassblowers will notice it, and that's what really matters. Well, even if you just notice it, that's what matters. Nothing worse than trying to sell one of your pieces that has just like flaws, which is literally every piece. It sucks selling your own work. That's the long story short of that one. All right, so now I'm going to take the same color as the back, which is that black. I want to pull it down to a little bit more of a clean point. Then I'm going to pick my starting 2 dots, and I want to heat both dots. Get the full dot and the section between the two nice and hot. You touch it and twist, and it's going to cause the dots to twist into each other. I guarantee you will not be able to see this until the final project, the final pictures tomorrow. So check that out. It's a really cool technique. It ends up looking really neat, but there's no way the camera's going to pick it up with the colors that I've used. So what I'm doing by blowing on it is rapidly cooling the joint of the two, because once I twist it, I want this to pop right off. And the easiest way to do that is just to move it around, wiggle it, and blow on it. Now, because my black color because of the black colored background is so thick, I can do this twisting of the glass, and it doesn't mess up any of the cone that is my interior design. In theory. You just got to do that to every single dot all the way around the piece. And last one. All right. So now first I want to get all that texture to go away because every time you twist it, it gets a little bit of a buggy thing. And then once that's gone, we're going to puntee up to the other side and start pushing in the lens. All right. So now we're going to cold seal to the bottom of the piece. And we start heating up. I want to heat up this thin spot right where the marble meets my new clear. That way, as I push in, it's not going to fold on itself. It will just kind of nicely and smoothly gather into that point. So what I'm basically doing is trying to heat right above where my clear gather is. And you see me kind of rotating back and forth. That's to ensure that a lot of the rod that I'm gathering from gets hot, and it makes sure that it flows evenly and nicely into the clear gather that I have that's the lens on actual marble. So I have to keep doing this until I get to 50% mass in the lens to the 50% mass of color that I've worked on thus far. This is also why I used such a large rod to start with, because you do not want to have it too short and either burn the ever-living hell out of your hand while you're doing this step, or have to compromise and have a smaller lens. If your lens is too small, then the whole 3D effect that you were shooting for with the vortex won't show up as well, and you just wasted a whole bunch of time. It's totally not heavy. Arms are not tired at all. While I'm doing this, I want to also kind of keep my large rod in my right hand centered to the piece, because I'm actually going to pop off the left hand handle and gather everything back up to get the final marble piece. And it's easier to have a 12 millimeter handle when you're doing that step than it is to have a 6 millimeter handle while you're doing that step. So we hit that 50% mark. I'm going to gather a little bit more because 50% is the absolute minimum. I still have a little bit of comfortable handle that I can get rid of. All right, that's probably good. So I let that cool for a second so my handle doesn't go crazy when I tap off the, so my thick rod doesn't go crazy when I tap off the little one. Tap. All right, so you can kind of see it's a big ass chunk of glass. So now I want to heat the bottom and basically gather that into the lens a little bit. If you use the mold too much at this step, it's possible for the bottom to come up and the top to come down, and then you get a fold crease, which will actually be seen through the lens in your final product. You don't want to do that, so it's better to just focus your heat on that joint where the color meets the clear and let it gather into itself. Once it stops being like this and becomes more of a slope, then you can start using the mold to get this thing to its final shape. I'm switching hands because my arm's getting tired. I'm a wuss. So it's starting to get out of that more pop and into a slope. So we'll take our 2-inch side of the mold. Marble it down a little bit, and you can see that recreated. Yeah, that. It recreated that kind of crease, so I have to do it again. And this part of marbles is all the same. It's just a whole lot of sitting here. Let that heat soak in. Don't try to rush anything. Just let it take its time and get nice and hot. And again, when I was saying how beginners don't get things hot enough, if you're ever making a marble and you haven't been blowing glass very long, get it hotter. No, get it hotter. Whatever you were trying to say. All right, back to the mold. Switch over to the 1.5-inch side. Recreated the crease again. Each time you mold it, it's going to recreate that crease, but it's smaller each time. So you just kind of have to keep putting it in the mold, heating up the back, putting it in the mold, heating it up the back until that crease completely goes away. And then you're ready to actually finish out the marble shape on your piece. That should about do it. So the first time I put it in here, I'm pressing pretty hard. I want all of the glass to kind of move around and fill every nook and cranny of the mold and subsequently of the piece itself so that it's nice and spherical and circular. And then you heat it all up to get rid of those cold marks, and then do it again lighter this time, and that will help shape it a little bit more without causing a million creases and stuff. All right, so now we're going to finally take it off of our 12mm handle. Want to heat this whole thing up one more time, make sure that all the cold marks have gone away. Then I'm going to let it cool for a second. Add our handle to the bottom. Real light cold seal. Make sure it's nice and centered. And then we're going to remove our 12 millimeter handle right at the place where it connects. And this one's a perfectly good size, aka huge, and I don't want to add anything to it. So I can heat the spot right where it touches. Ooh, that's heavy. I'm going to actually pull that off instead of gathering it in like I usually do. And do it one more time. So this is the first stage where you can actually see if the pattern on the inside of your marble is awesome or not. This one's pretty damn good, so I'm happy about that. I don't think I'll be able to pick it up in the webcam, but if you check the video or on my Facebook tomorrow, you will see what all of my efforts amounted to. Unless I drop it, and then the answer is not. So this is a bit oblong. So I'm trying to take the time to straighten it out, make sure that it actually ends up as a marble. This tends to happen quite a bit when you're messing with vortex marbles, because you know that whole process of smushing the lens in will create more of an umbrella, so that a lot of times your marble, when you start shaping it like this, isn't actually a marble. It's just kind of slightly off. It's also why I change the axis on my piece when I'm making them. That'll help even out that whole concept. All right, so I'm going to change the axis. And I don't have a good handle for that, so I'm going to have to grab one. That'll work. Another cold seal. This time I want to attach it to the clear at an angle. Tap. Now, me dropping my hand immediately like that helps center the marble and also reduce stress on the new handle. Now we're at that work half the marble at a time phase. So I want to get the bottom half of this really, really hot. Run it through the mold. And it's pretty good. The misshapenness has gotten worked out of it. So I just have one little bump somewhere. I can feel it. I can't really see it, but I can feel it. So I'm going to go ahead and heat it up, run it through again. And now it is gone. Get rid of the cold marks. So now comes the part where I'm actually going to take it off of the piece. So my next handle needs to be incredibly weak. So I want to let this piece cool for a minute. Oh, what the heck is that? Stuff happens. It's a cold mark that I didn't quite melt out. Okay, now it's gone. All right. So like I said, let that cool for a second. Heat up the tip of the rod. Let that cool for a second. And then barely touch the two. So I don't know if you can see that little spike there. That was because my last cold seal got too hot during the process and adhered. So now I want to pull that off. And then I actually have to run this through the mold to make sure that completely goes away. But I want to avoid hitting my other handle at all. Like, I don't even want to get close. Otherwise, that will adhere too much, and that's going to be my final handle. So I have to be careful not to let that happen. All right, got rid of that mess on the bottom. Now to get rid of the cold marks from the mold. Those are gone. Now we want to let this cool for just a second so I don't make a crease when I go to take off the handle. So if you can see, but you got a nice kind of vortex going on there. And that's all sparkly and shiny and awesome. All right, set it in the mold. No. This marble's incredibly thick, so it retains a lot of heat. So when you let it cool, you really got to let it cool for a minute. Tap off the handle. Fix the scar. And then make sure you let that cool before you stick it in the kiln. Whew. All right. So that's it for today. If any of you watched this entire time, thank you. You're like a legend. If you just caught the end, you're still pretty awesome. So tomorrow I'll be posting videos and pictures of all of this on both my Facebook and the video on YouTube. So feel free to stop back by and check it out, and you'll actually get to see what these projects look like when they're in proper light and they're not hot or in the kiln or in a webcam. All of those products will be for sale. So if you'd like any of them, consider buying it. Just hit me up. And then if you want to support me, please like the video if you haven't already. Subscribe to my channel. And then if you want to support me further, you can go to Patreon to Vulcan Glass TV, and that will allow you to subscribe, become a patron, and get some cool stuff that I will make live for you on air. Other than that, that's pretty much it. Thanks you guys so much for joining me. My next stream is going to be on Sunday, and it's going to be doing a pipe stream, probably pretty focused on Sherlocks because I really feel like making Sherlocks. And I may end up using that disc that we made today in a project too. I'm not sure. I haven't decided yet. So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for joining me.